It's the 10th conference, so I brought back a bunch of people from the early days of the community to sort of talk about the community and lives and everything. So I'm very excited for this. As I mentioned before, Jon has done a podcast here the past few years, and now he's going to interview all of us. So please welcome the Retrospective panel.
Hello. Welcome to the Retrospective R panel. I'm here with distinguished guests. I'll let them introduce themselves, and I also have an opening question for them as they introduce themselves. So starting with Drew, tell us about the genesis of the R Meetup, which I guess in some ways kind of led to this conference. Is that right?
100%.
Yeah. Drew Conway. I was the original organizer of the R Meetup, but actually not the original organizer of the first R Meetup, which is how the Meetup started. There was a man named Josh Reich, who some people from the early kind of New York City data science community will know. He was the founder of Simple Bank, and then to Simple, and then it ultimately was, I think, acquired by BBVA sometime in the last 15 years. But I got connected to kind of the blogs and just like literally the Meetup website looking for a place to find community, and saw that there was this Meetup for R happening. So I went to it, and it was literally probably 15 people sitting in a conference room at Union Square Ventures, and Josh gave a presentation just on base R, which for me as a graduate student who didn't want to program in Stata was awesome, and got to learn like an actual programming language. And then at the end of the Meetup, he said very pointedly, so if we want to do this again, we have to find a different place to do it because they're not going to let us hold a Meetup here anymore. Can anyone help? And I was a graduate student at NYU at the time, so I just sort of sheepishly raised my hand and said, well, I can ask. Maybe I can get a classroom for us at the university, which I was able to do. And then I kind of co-ran it, I guess, with Josh for a little while. You know, the hardest thing about doing any kind of event, particularly a Meetup, and everybody on the stage can attest to this, is just finding speakers and finding space. And so we kind of divide and conquer on that for the better part of that year. And then eventually Josh said, like, hey, I'm a startup founder, you're a graduate student, you can do this. So I took it over from him and worked on it for the next several years.
Nice. Thank you, Drew. Jared, so then take it away. How did your leading of the R Meetup come to be? There's also, I mean, actually the renaming is something that we should get from you as well, to the open source statistical programming Meetup.
Right, yeah, so I thought something really catchy and short that everybody could remember. But basically, I mean, the truth is, getting back to my previous comment, there became a point somewhere in like the early 2010s that restricting the Meetup to only things related to R seemed sort of foolishly restrictive, and there were lots of people doing interesting stuff, and it also meant that it was easier to find speakers if I kind of opened up the subject matter and the content a little bit. So we had speakers who were non-R specific for a while, and then really, truthfully, as a kind of naive marketing idea, I said, well, if we name it something different that makes it obvious that it's not just about R, maybe more people will come and there'll be a increase in the community. So that was really it. It was a pretty practical decision, and probably should have thought about it less as a graduate student, more as a marketer when I changed the name. But that was it.
What year was that?
What was that? You asked me that question. I think it was like 2011.
Yep.
Yeah, 2011. And I like wrote a long email trying to justify why I did it. Nobody cared.
So going back 15 years, so it was 2 years before that, 2009 was when the Meetup started meeting regularly.
Yeah.
That first Meetup happened. Then 2 years later, it changed to the Open Statistical Programming Meetup. How long, Jared, do you think before this conference will be called the Open Statistical Programming?
We might have to go for a different title, though, make it a little shorter.
Yeah, Jared's much better.
Yeah, so tell us about how the conference came to be, Jared, 5 years later.
So what happened was, by then, Drew had already handed over the reins to the Meetup to both me and Wes. I'm not sure if Wes is still here.
He's backstage. Saw him
backstage,
lurking.
Wes back there. So he handed it over to us because I love R, and Wes made Python a thing in data science. So we ran it together, had a lot of good time, and then after a few years, I was friendly with this group of people at Workbench. It's this, at the time they called themselves an incubator, now it's a VC, and they had this beautiful loft space. I said, hey, I love this Meetup. Why don't we just make like a 2-day party out of this Meetup? And I went to them, they said they loved it and they wanted to do it. They hosted us, they partnered up, they helped us organize it. I just wanted to have like a 2-day party of the Meetup. Why have it once a month for an hour when you could do 2 solid days of it?
Nice. And it's been 2 days of pizza and ice cream sandwiches since?
They wouldn't let me do pizza the first few years. They thought it was looked like we were cheaping out. But I'm like, no, I'm obsessed with pizza. We have to have pizza. And they eventually relented.
Nice. You found the finest pizzas, as you always do.
I try.
Do you still keep track of pizzas on, there's like a, yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, so I'm obsessed with pizzas. Everyone here knows by now. I was a pizza tour guide. I wrote my thesis on pizza. It's a thing. I took my engagement photos at a pizza place. We had a pizza truck at the wedding. It's a thing. People often wonder if I'm more obsessed with pizza or my wife, but you win. And we started very early on. So actually, Drew started serving pizza at the Meetup.
Yep.
Very early on in it. I remember at first you started serving some other food, there's a cheese and vegetable platter, and then you switched to pizza. And so and you always got it from Pizza Mercado every single time.
Wow, good memory.
Easier. Yeah. And eventually, when you handed over the reins, I'm like, we're going to do a different pizza place each month and just have people rank it on a 5-point scale. We've been collecting it every single month since then. And the data is available as a live JSON feed at jaredlander.com/data. And on the Meetup website, we have an interactive bar chart showing the ratings.
Nice. Do you know what our library is used to make that attractive bar chart?
Yes, it's ggplot and Plotly.
Nice.
Yep.
So, Emily, tell us about Our Ladies NYC formation, which followed soon after.
Yeah, so Our Ladies as an organization started in 2012 in San Francisco, and I think the New York chapter was the 5th or 6th chapter to open in 2016 by Soumya Kalra, was the founder of that organization. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here with us today, but yeah, she put out a call on Twitter for board members to apply, and I was lucky to see it back in the good old days of the Twitter data community, one of the sad things about that demise. And so I was very, very, very excited to hear about women-focused group of, R programmers. I was like, yes, count me in. So I applied to get involved in that and was on the board for 3 years, from 2016 to 2019. And during that time, the organization just completely exploded into a huge and vibrant community of people in New York doing R programming and getting together and having fun.
Nice. And JD, you've been involved in the New York community in one way or another for quite some time, and you migrated it to another big city. Tell us about that.
Oh, actually, it was parallel. So in 2009, I was in Chicago and saw what was going on with the meetups, and I was buddies with it was all guys who were running the Chicago R and Finance Conference. And Dirk Edebutel and Jeff Ryan and those guys. And we would get together once a month to have beer at Jack's Tap. And one of them went and spoke, I think, in LA. Did LA have a...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, had a pretty active...
It was Slizard, right?
Yeah, thanks. And I think one of them, maybe Dirk, spoke there and came back and said, I was cynical on this, but I think it's a good idea. But we're all doing the R Finance. JD, you should go do that. And and we'll come. And I'm like, all right, here's what we're gonna do. We're just gonna do basically this, where there was 5 or 6 of us drinking beer and talking about analytics. And but we're gonna start inviting other people. And even if nobody shows up, we're doing this anyway. And actually, that was the best bootstrapping of a meetup, is have a core group of 4 or 5 people that would kind of be doing that anyway, and then just invite other people to come, right? And then that grew, and by the time I left Chicago 2 or 3 years later, I don't know, we had 150 people or something signed up regularly, would have 30 or so, and then I moved to Bermuda for 4 years, as one does. And then when I moved back to the States from Bermuda, I moved here to the New York area, and so began to become more involved with Jared in the R meetups here.
Nice. And so that was called the Chicago R User Group.
Yes,
Yeah?
C-Rug.
C-Rug. Nice.
And our finance is happening right now, today.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we had a scheduling collision, and that's why Jeff Ryan actually isn't here. He's going to come. But their conference is going on today. And they actually, some of their format inspired the R conference format. The short talks. Originally it was a Friday, Saturday conference hours, which is what they did, and we switched to Thursday, Friday, but we got that from them. So we got a lot of inspiration from them.
Nice. Now even the dates.
My history of ridiculous gonzo shit started at the R Finance. So it's like trading people, right? We say finance, we don't mean accounting, right? It's like people who do trading, and they won't tell you what company they work for when you meet them at the conference. Oh, I work in the Loop. Well, they work at a proprietary trading shop or, wealth management or whatever. And it's an open source conference, so it's not vendor sponsored, but still pretty tight-lipped, proper, lots of khakis and collared shirts at the conference. And I gave a lightning talk and did it in rhyming Seussian verse, which, were you there? It's available on SoundCloud. I recorded it with my iPhone up on the counter because it's one of these things of I can't believe I'm doing this. Wow, what the hell? and I did that, and it was just I got a standing ovation, the only one in my life, for a 6-minute talk in rhyming Seussian verse. But that's been kind of one of the things that's neat about the open source conferences is there's tolerance and space for trying out lots of things, some of which are ridiculous like me, and some are just new ideas, right? And that's what's neat about these, I think.
JD, tell us more about Seussian verse. What's that?
Oh, like Dr. Seuss, right? Where that rhyming pattern.
Of course.
Perfect.
So over all these years, 15 years total, stretching back, I guess in both cases in Chicago and New York, what are some fond memories, friendships formed, jobs found, books written as a result of your groups? How about we start with you again, Drew?
Gosh, so many. I think even personally have so much of the community to thank for my own career success and having had, lots of doors open for me and people to meet just by, there's something really powerful about organizing an event like this or organizing in general because you sort of become a central node in a lot of other people's access to a community, and therefore that opens up a lot for you. So, as a plug for just that in general, I would recommend to anyone listening or folks thinking about it, like the amount that you get out relative to what you put in is enormous. And so I highly recommend doing that, in whatever subject matter, whether it's statistical programming or something else. For me personally, and someone, there's so many people who I only arrived here for the second half of today, but literally in order of speakers were people that have all spoke at the meetup when I was there. I got to meet through the community, and I've watched their careers and others grow wildly successfully through that. And it's just amazing to think about, where the community was, almost 20 years ago to where it is now. And for me, folks who aren't here that, definitely hold a special place in my heart. Folks like, I met John Miles White. We wrote a book together. He's now, I don't know, probably like second in command at Meta by now. I don't know exactly what his title is, but he's been very, very successful. And I was looking at old photos of, some of our nights out in the early days of the meetup and seeing like Mike Dewar, who was a graduate student at Columbia and now is the head of AI for MasterCard, I think, in the UK. And, there's just been so many people who have, I've been very fortunate to get to know through this and hopefully many, many more. I think that's the beauty of this group.
Nice, yeah. And Jared, speaking of jobs, at the beginning of any New York Open Statistical Programming meetups that I've been to, you have started things off by saying, if anybody here in the audience has any job opportunities, would you like to stand up and talk about them? Has that practice always been around?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Because I know back when Drew was running it, there was always people getting hired.
Yep.
I don't know if Drew ever explicitly said who's hiring.
Yeah, we did. We instituted that, I don't know, probably in 2010 or something. Whenever the meetups were at the AOL building. That was like when we started doing that. That's my memory of it.
Yeah, so that's when I must have just picked up from you.
Yeah.
But I always make the very first question is, who's hiring?
Yeah.
Because so many people have said they have gotten jobs by us asking that question. And I love that, allowing people to find new passions and have a livelihood, all just because we say who's hiring.
Yeah, I remember that, my memory of it is that actually was sort of sourced from the audience, people asking if they could make those announcements. And then it became so much that we actually had to sort of like almost have a lottery process because it would take 40 minutes just to get through all the job announcements to get it done.
Yeah, so, and then moving on to Jared, anything else that you'd like to add around friendships, jobs, books coming through this? You obviously, you run for Pearson, for the Addison Wesley imprint, you run a whole series of books there. You've been giving away their books all day. How did that come about?
Well, so how I got my my first book deal, this Deborah was walking around at Strata, going to conferences, and I was working the Revolution booth. She came up to me and said, "Do you know anyone who could write a book about R?" And I was like, "Well, Drew just wrote a book about R, so like can't say him." I'm like, I don't know, right? And then actually Paul Dix, who ran the machine learning meetup, he already wrote a book for Deborah, so she asked him, and he's like, "Oh, Jared's obsessed with R." So then he referred me, and I'm like, "That's great." And then afterwards, Deborah asked me who else should write books. And I found, obviously, Dan Chen wrote the Python book, and Deep Learning Illustrated, which I love. And I just found all of these people from the meetup group to write books for Deborah and Pearson. But beyond that, Jeroen Janssens, who was here last week, he wrote the book Data Science at the Command Line, and he will say this every time. The reason he wrote it is because one time I asked him to give a talk about command line tools at the meetup. He's like, "Wow, I can make a book about this." Right? And stuff like that happens, and just they get ideas from the meetup and gives them a testing ground, and they could write.
For sure. Yeah, that's if I can indulge myself as the host for a moment, I am hugely indebted to this community for pretty much everything that's happened in my career, certainly in terms of doing things for the public. So I was at ICML in 2016, I think, the International Conference on Machine Learning, and that happened to be in New York. So I went to ICML during the day, and there was a lecture from somebody who had been working on deep learning since the 80s. Jan LeCun was sitting in the front row, nodding his head to everything, and it was a historical retrospective like this on deep learning and communities like the NeurIPS conference. And something that was clear was that in deep learning in particular, a lot of the innovation that they had was from a diverse group of people getting together in person and throwing ideas at the wall, trying to come up with new concepts of, say, representing biological things in computer systems. And so I remember writing in my phone at that lecture at ICML, ask tonight at the Open Statistical Programming Meetup whether anybody would like to start a deep learning study group. And so that evening, there happened to be a meetup. I stood up at the beginning when there was the job announcements opening, and I realized I was using that, would anyone like, talk about job opportunities. I was kind of abusing it for a different purpose, but I thought, people might be interested to hear this. And I don't know if it's something just a little bit of shyness about statistical programmers or machine learning people. It was packed. And there wasn't like anybody looking at me as I said, "I'd like to start a deep learning study group. Would anyone be interested? We can work through Stanford lectures or chapters of books together, hold ourselves accountable, answer each other's questions." There wasn't any head nodding, any eye contact. And I sat down feeling like, all right, you just embarrassed yourself, but it doesn't really matter. After the talk, a dozen people came up to me, and that formed the basis of the group, similar to what you were talking about, JD, when you have like this core of people. And that core of people, the dozen of us, were able to right off the bat come up with a structure for things that we should be learning in this study group. And we had, within a month, we had over 200 people on the email newsletter, and we had 60 people showing up to the early sessions of that, meeting kind of every week or two. That led to me then reaching back out to you, Jared, months later, maybe about a year later, to say, I've developed this expertise in talking about deep learning in front of this deep learning study group in several of these sessions. Could I come and do a talk on deep learning at the Open Statistical Programming Meetup? And you were skeptical, at least by email. And we didn't even know each other. Yeah. So I'm just I was like, I've been to some of your meetups. And
deep learning is a fad.
There had never been a deep learning talk at the meetup at that time. And this also speaks to your level of curation and commitment to this community, because it was several emails back and forth where you're like, give me an idea of what topics you would be covering. Flesh this out a bit more into like sub-bullets. And then I was able to convince you that I had enough, that it would be a good talk, and he let me come on because someone dropped out. Like, we have an empty spot coming up next month. And it was an unreal experience. The room was packed. You had an overflow room. People were standing around the edges. And Deborah was in the audience, Deborah Williams, this acquisitions editor at Pearson, which led to making videos and a book for deep learning, a book on deep learning Illustrated, which has been given away today many times. And then that in turn led to me being asked to be a guest on the Super Data Science podcast, which was already one of the most listened to data science podcasts years ago. And that host, Kirill, who founded it and ran it for the first 4 years, liked me enough as a guest that he reached out a few months later and said, I'm actually thinking of stopping being host of this. Would you like to host it? And now we've grown it into the number 12 technology podcast globally, number 1 in data science for sure. And yeah, so I owe so much to this community. And I guess it kind of speaks to the importance of communities in general for allowing people to test ideas, like you're talking about Chen, and being able to test out his, or it was Jeroen you were speaking about. Anyway, indulging myself speaking for a very long time. Emily, JD, do you guys have any big stories on, friendships, jobs, books, or maybe even embarrassing or memorable stories? If they're about Jared, you get extra points.
Oh, I haven't written, excuse me, I haven't written a book, and I don't have any embarrassing stories about Jared that I can think of off the top of my head. But just, to say that these communities have been also, for me, so integral to my both development as an R programmer, but also to my career trajectory, my connections, through Our Ladies and the meetups and the open statistical programming, and then the New York R Conference. Then I got involved in the R Medicine Conference, and I know all these people now, and who I wouldn't have known before. And even today, and yesterday, I met new people who, I'm going to know for hopefully a long time to come, and hopefully I'll hear from them going forward. So, just very important part of my life and my career, being part of these communities. Maybe I'll write a book about it someday.
You should.
I'm sure Deborah.
So
She heard it anyway.
through running the Chicago R Meetup, I met Paul Teeter, and Paul, I think as I was getting to know him, he got a contract to write the R cookbook for O'Reilly. And I was I started doing, technical review I did technical review on that, then I was a technical reviewer on the first Pandas book, which always blows the minds of my coworkers when I would go by their desk, pull it open, and point out that I was in the, the acknowledgments or whatever. They thought that was just mind-blowing. Why is this guy because it would be IT guys, right? And I'm not in IT, right? I'm in the business. Holy crap, this guy from the business is was a reviewer on this book that I'm reading. Holy crap. Paul Teeter did the first R cookbook, and then I think it was actually at an R studio conference. He was like, hey, do you have, time to catch up? And I hadn't seen him in a little while. And I'm like, yeah, sure. And he's like, it's time to update the R cookbook, but I don't have bandwidth. You know anybody who'd be interested in doing it? And I had been approached to write books right as we were moving to Bermuda. And when you're moving is not the time you should commit to write books, right? So I hadn't, and I had passed, and I always had a little bit of remorse that I hadn't done that, because that was sort of as things really took off with data science. And I was like, I really missed the boat on that one. And so when Paul gave me the opportunity to rewrite the R cookbook, I jumped on it, and he became my technical editor. We're co-authors, but I did full rewrite of the contents, and then he was my technical reviewer. But I met him through the Chicago R user group, and then similarly through the community, I've met other people, and I am working on another book now. So I chose to do it right as I'm changing jobs, so that's tremendously smart of me.
Are you able to tell us anything about that new book?
Yeah, we're looking at, we're trying to figure out the using LLMs to help with data science workflows, more like what Jon presented on here, more like that than, say, building RAG. We're like, a whole bunch of this is helping you iterate smarter and faster. And I feel like, maybe not this crowd, but some folks who are adjacent to this crowd or people we work with kind of haven't figured that out yet, that kind of the magic there is the iterating, the helping you brainstorm, the reviewing maybe something you did. We can all figure out pretty good. It's pretty good at interpreting error messages, but that's low-lying fruit, and that's not iterative. Some of the iterative stuff can be really helpful, but you got to have guardrails, right? And one of the challenges with writing this is just the whole world's moving underneath us, right? As we're trying to figure out how to explain this, it's like, well, that's not germane anymore, and trying to figure this out.
Nice, very cool. I'm looking forward to checking that new book out.
I hope we get it out.
Might have to have you on the Super Data Science podcast to talk about it. when it's ready.
Fantastic.
Fantastic. All right, so hopefully I have prepared our guests on the panel enough for this question. Hopefully your subconscious has worked on this. So the next question is going to be about, before I call anyone by name, I'll give you a chance to work on this a little bit. So what is a notable open source library, maybe in R, maybe not, because this is also about the Open Statistical Programming Meetup, so we can broaden things a bit. But what is a notable open source package that you feel like people should know about, either because you love it so much, or you hate it so much, or it's new and you can't stop thinking about it? And we'll go in the same order that we have been going. We'll start with Drew.
Sure. Well, I guess in the spirit of this being a retrospective panel, I won't talk about a new package. But in the days when I was running the R Meetup, and particularly in my years as a graduate student, I spent a lot of time working in kind of graphs and thinking about social networks. And those days was when you could get a lot of data about social networks, and it was the early days of it. And I happened in those days as well to be a kind of contributor to a Python package called NetworkX, which if you've, is still quite popular. And if you do that kind of work, is still great. But I wanted to be doing things in R, but there wasn't NetworkX in R. So I finally found this package called iGraph, which had everything I wanted in it. And again, in the spirit of like meeting and learning about the community, I had so many questions about how to do the things that I had been doing in NetworkX and iGraph. I got connected to the authors of that, one of which was a fellow graduate student who happened to be at the University of Michigan, a guy named Mike Bomarito, who him and his partner now have gone on and done a bunch of really interesting work in like generative AI around the law. They're both lawyers now, and they do like LLMs in legal work. And so that package became kind of a central part of what pulled me over to being like a full-time R programmer for a while, because it was the one thing that I couldn't do in R, now I suddenly could do, and that was the thing. And it's still a very well-maintained package, so if anybody's doing that kind of work, I highly recommend it.
iGraph.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Cool. Jared?
So there's this package called Segway. So I'll give a real answer, but so Segway is actually a package written by JD 14 years ago, back when it was hard to do things automatically in AWS. And the reason I want to say it, not just because I want to make a good joke, when someone mentioned that package at the meetup and JD was not there, people cheered for it. So it was awesome. But I guess for me, I'm really, really into the targets package. It's like make, but in R, which sort of lets you build a DAG out of your functions automatically. You have a bunch of functions that feed into each other. It creates a DAG, and it only executes the part of the code that needs to be executed. So you have a part of the code that hasn't changed since the last time you ran it. It uses cached results. And this has saved so much time and just completely redone my workflow. It's been so incredibly helpful. So I think everyone should know targets.
What is the equivalent of targets in Python?
So it's after it came out of targets, they came out with SnakeMake.
Oh.
So SnakeMake, so targets is based on make. It was actually, originally targets, there was a package called Drake, which was the R version of make. But then they redid it, made it targets, and then someone in the Python community liked it. I think Dan Chen might have been involved, and they made SnakeMake.
Snake make?
Yeah, like a snake, like Python is a snake,
Yeah.
and make for make.
Because second time they said snake bake. And I was
yeah.
like,
Yeah, so
That's kinda-
SnakeMake, and
oh.
apparently that is the equivalent of targets. I don't know if it has feature parity, which one does. Like, targets, you could run this on a cluster remotely. I don't know what SnakeMake does, but it's supposed to be very similar.
I was hoping SnakeMake would be a one-line command that would allow you place snake in a command line.
Oh, gotta get your own out here, I'm sure.
the Nokia version of snake.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Emily?
Oh yeah, I was trying to think about like what's a non-glitzy package, but that I like use all the time. And the package that I know that I load every single time I open up an R project to start a new project for a collaborator is the janitor package. I don't know if you guys are all using this, but I mean, every time I read in a data set to do an analysis, I run my, remove empty and my clean names at minimum to like get those couple of things like exactly where I know I need them, because, my files with my data names that are like the first tumor volume measure that I ever took in NG per ML parentheses, I collected this by hand. It takes care of that for me, so.
Nice. Cleaning things up with Janitor and JD.
The most boring answer ever, and it's dplyr, because it just is such good syntax that just works.
Hadley left already.
I know, I'm kissing his ass for nothing. That's really, that's
I mean,
a
we all
shame.
wanted to say it.
Yeah, I'm picking up the low-lying fruit here. The thing I like about it is I work with business folks who don't code at all, just Excel. They can look at dplyr code that I write and talk to me about it. Like, oh, I think we should maybe do what, like they just look at that and it's intuitive. It's that they probably couldn't write it from scratch, but they can parse it when they look at it and they get, some of the if-then kind of syntax is a little tricky, but after I explained it, they're like, oh, okay, cool. So, I mean, I think that's a testament to a clearly written high-level language when non-users can look at it and understand generally what's going on.
Yeah, I love dplyr too, no question about it. Going beyond just particular open source packages, we are at a time in history where we're seeing really powerful AI technologies. We are seeing AI talked about by the public for the first time in the last couple of years. In a lot of ways, the open source communities and obviously the libraries that have been developed in R, in Python in particular, these have allowed this AI renaissance to occur. And I am a techno-optimist. I believe that we are on the precipice of much, much bigger things and that those great things are accelerating. I think that we have a lot of wind at our backs in the sense of data costs, data storage costs plummeting all the time, data collection increasing exponentially year over year all the time, compute costs going down a lot exponentially all the time. And so with these kinds of winds at our back, we have more and more intelligent data applications at our fingertips, in our browsers, on our phones, in our cars, in devices, increasingly all over the home and the workplace. So this is a big question, but what are you excited about? What are you concerned about in terms of data and AI applications in our lifetimes, or maybe even in your children's lifetimes? Drew.
Sure. Well, I guess, in the short term, for excitement, and actually I think, for folks who are here or were listening to Hillary's talk, I think she really did a great job in kind of classifying the challenges of general purpose use of transformer and GPT technology, this idea of sort of accessing just the median output of stuff. In my professional life, we use a lot of these tools really as a way of creating more efficient workflows for more traditional modeling, like finding these kind of well-specified problems that have a kind of testable right answer, that we have confidence in the output, and then we can take those answers and say, well, it would be much more efficient for this machine to do it, even with some stochastic output being wrong, we can still use that technology. And that allows us to, have higher order thought on what we might want to do with that, say, features that we generate as a result of that. And so that makes me really excited because I think it's, like any other tool, it just allows you to kind of expand the canvas of stuff that you can do with them. I mean, certainly, on the negative side, I think we just don't really, the technologies like this, particularly I think on the generative side, that have this kind of pernicious influence of what people believe or don't believe, or even again in a kind of professional application, it's so much easier now to apply these things without having any sense of how they could blow up in your face, and maybe not even caring until it's too late, and then you're really kind of in a bad situation. So, I think that the pendulum will swing wildly back and forth for a while, and what I guess the thing that I'm most uncertain about is what will become kind of the new normal around this stuff, and what, without getting into too large of a conversation, like what role governments will play in that, and what role private industry will play with that, and academia, and we don't tend to be very good at that kind of trilateral negotiation.
Great answer. Jared?
Also, for the excited part, embeddings. Because it's sort of like it's trying to make a mathematical understanding of the world. And I've seen some use case recently, if you're trying to describe a bunch of symptoms, you might say you stood up and you felt faint, you might say the room was spinning, you might say you were dizzy. It was all vertigo, right? And now if you can map those all together and have embeddings, they should all have a similar distance to each other, and then be able to say, okay, well, this then gets generative and talks about vertigo, right? And it's a way of helping create understanding, and whether that's translating languages or just translating concepts. I think that is really cool if an embedding can sort of become like a true, like, deep understanding of the world. I think that is really, really awesome. The thing I'm worried about is, and I'm totally taking this from someone else, they said that all of this AI is automating away all of our creative work, leaving us time to do manual drudgery. Where in reality, we want to do the other things, but get away the manual stuff and let us be more creative. So I don't want that to happen. I want to open up the creativity.
Great answer. Yeah. Emily?
Yeah, it's a good question. I tend to be a late adopter of new things. It's both like a personality trait of mine. I'm really risk averse, and also in the field I work in, in medicine and biostatistics, like we're a little bit, I think, less tech savvy and a little more behind the times, partly because of data privacy issues and some other things. So I'm curious to see, for sure AI is coming to medicine, and I think it's going to be a very powerful tool actually in medical applications, in actual patient settings, and also in dealing with electronic health record data, which is like a completely missed source of information right now in many, many ways, because doctors write their notes into these charts, and it's not in a variable field where we can get it into a data set that I can analyze, but the information's in there, right? So like large language models are a perfect fit for something like that. So I think there's going to be some like great applications in medicine that I'm excited about. I don't know what they're going to be, and I'm like personally just waiting to see. I'm not like doing anything right now, but I'm excited about that. On the other hand, I'm like, should I even be saving for college for my kids? Is there going to be like a job market in 15 years when they're like going into the world? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, lots of exciting things happening in medicine for sure. And yeah, could potentially have a big impact on our lifespans, quality of life as we get into old age and dealing with the big retiring population coming up. Hopefully AI can help us a bit in medicine. JD?
I'm reminded, like we all think in analogies, or at least most of us do quite a bit. So I think, and I find I do that more as I've gotten older because I got more things to, make analogies with, right? And I'm reminded of my optimism about the internet in the early 2000s, but it was also kind of naive. And my optimism, I love old machines, and I had an old motorcycle, I've had old Porsches, and the online communities in the early 2000s were just amazing because I could get the old manuals, and there was all these other gearheads who were working through the same problem, and I could post a picture of something, and somebody would tell me what the problem was and how to learn how it worked and fix it. And I was just like, I felt like I was living in some sort of renaissance of information because just, 20 years earlier, 10 years earlier, if you had an old machine, and God help you if you had an old British or German machine, and you lived in a rural area in the United States, it was very hard to work on it, get parts, figure out what was wrong, and the internet totally changed that. And I felt like, wow, for people like me who are makers and tinkerers and everything, this is an amazing, world and a renaissance of everything. And I had no appreciation of how, also it allowed crazy people with really, messed up ideas to all find each other and through the process of selection bias reinforce all the worst qualities of humanity within each other. Like I never saw that coming. Never in a million years would have, spitballed that that's what was going to come out, right? And it did. But we still have the other. So it's not like it turned into the bad thing. It's like it's the good thing and the ugly thing. And I think we're going to see that with the AI as well. There's going to be a whole bunch of stuff, and where some of us are just going to be like, "This is amazing." It takes a bunch of drudgery out of a bunch of stuff, and then there's probably also going to be some awful stuff that I'll sit up here and look back and go, "Yeah, I remember that conference when I said there's going to be some shit." Well, there's some shit now. But I don't know what it is, and that's that's my frustration. Is I don't have enough foresight to see through the veil of uncertainty of exactly what it is. But I guarantee there's going to be some messy stuff as we progress, and I just hope that we're savvy enough and collective enough to navigate it, because we've had mixed outcome on the internet. We could argue net good or net bad. I think net good, but it's bumpy. We got bumps ahead, yo.
A year ago, we had drones being used for the first time in battle without any human in the loop in the Ukraine-Russia conflict in order to help those drones be able to get through jamming that Russians were doing. And so that sort of thing could potentially, you could imagine a few bad outcomes from that kind of, from weapons being fully autonomous.
You can go read Daniel Suarez's books if that's appealing to any of you. He had a whole series of books around some of these things.
There you go. All right, so let's open up now to the audience to see if you have any questions for our illustrious panel here.
Oh my God.
We have microphone people
Here's the question.
flanking. We might have a question for Dad from the front row. No?
Let this child in here.
Should I go? Or are we?
I think he might have a question.
He actually has a question. Okay, good. I don't want to upstage him.
Okay, we'll come back to you, buddy.
Sorry.
No worries.
This is a question for me in row 7.
Should I go?
Hey, Chris, yeah.
From me.
Thank you all for the role that you've played in bringing this community together. It's really a fantastic community, has been for many years. It's brought a lot to me in my career as well. If we go back to the ancient 2010s, this community also had a very vibrant online community. I know that I loved being part of the Twitter community in particular. I remember once getting very excited that Hadley retweeted something of mine, and I told my wife, and she's like, "Who and what? Why is this exciting to you? I don't quite understand." But you know, that we've definitely lost something there, I think, with all of the stuff that's happened, particularly to Twitter. So I wonder if you guys have any thoughts about how we can either revive that or revamp it, or where those things are happening now, because I haven't found it existing in today's world.
I agree with you, Chris. My hopeful thought is that, you know, when that Twitter community was so vibrant, it was because Twitter itself was a very, you know, new and vibrant place. And so I imagine that there is a community that may exist just on a platform that, you know, would reject me because I'm so old now, and it just wouldn't make sense for me to be on it. So that would be a question I'd love to ask, you know, your students at NYU. Like, where are they having the conversation? Because I suspect that it's, you know, in a different place, in a different format. You know, but to try to revitalize what existed on Twitter today is more of a problem of the platform, less, I think, of the community.
I remember one of the things, one of the early meetups, we were all marveling how amazing the Stack Overflow, our community was, how it was so nice and good. And then we looked around the room, we realized it was all of us talking to each other.
Right. Right.
So we need to find some way to get the people in the room again to start talking, but then find this new platform. So I don't know where it is either. It'd be nice to see. Again, I like your question. Come back after your next semester, please, and let us know, Gus.
I mean, maybe it's TikTok. I don't know. I don't know that there's a lot of conversations happening on TikTok.
Yeah.
But
Bizarrely, and something that it's a word that makes people's eyes roll. But conservatively, 80%, and I'm being very conservative with that number, you know, I've had hundreds of guests on my podcast, and I ask them at the end of every episode where people should follow them or connect with them to ask them questions. Conservatively, 80% say LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I've been hearing that a lot too.
And in a bunch of ways, it's like least common denominator in that reasonably civil, because people know their boss is on there, right? And they see that it's like a public face. It's so ridiculous at some level because everybody sounds like, you know, a Big Four consultant or something. They're trying, there's so much posturing, you know, trying to sound smart or appear a certain way. But it is like a lowest common denominator. Everybody's got an account who's, you know, professional just about. I don't know anybody who doesn't.
Yeah, we do have a question up in the front row that we'll need a mic to come over here for. But in the meantime, we've got one there.
Here's the mic.
Yep, that's, sorry. Oh, sorry, it's right behind you first, sorry. Oh.
Mark out the mic. Okay.
I just wanted to say thanks to Drew and JD and Jared and the community, because I'm actually one of the founders of the data community in the DC area. And, you know, Max is from DC, and there's a couple of folks here in the conference that came from DC. And we drew inspiration from what Drew and the folks were doing here in New York back in 2010. So I probably really thanks to the, and I met Drew and JD, Jared later, but Drew and JD on Twitter probably around 2009, and we did the Stack Overflow thing, and I actually started coming to the events here in New York, and that's where I met all these folks, and then we started kind of modeling the same things in DC, and we also grew the DC community to a pretty vibrant. I'm not involved with it anymore, but I used to be right in the early days, and for me also it's been a great platform for career growth, learning. I actually started running the our Meetup group without knowing R, and it's a true story. And I learned R by listening to other people talk about R. It's a true story. Yeah, and so I just want to say thanks, and it's been a great ride. It's been awesome. I've just the quality of people that we've met along the way. So just want to say thanks.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. Yeah.
And then, so if you can bring that mic up to the very front row here, we have a question to ask here, but we've got, yes, you in the green shirt, if you'd like to go next. Yes.
I was, I think, at one of the very first meetings. I was a consultant at the time, and I was trying to get better at R. Honestly, this stuff is kind of tangential to the work that I do most of the time, but I mean, I have to keep learning. I have a question about just general maintenance of open source. I mean, I've had the experience of like a package being decommissioned that someone did work. How are we going to, like, how are things going to be maintained? And also, how does that apply to, let's say, Meetup in general, and whether we're going to continue using Meetup or some other source way of bringing people together, because there have been a lot of meetups that came to an end. So, and we went through COVID also.
Well, there's the XKCD about like all the world's infrastructure being propped up by this one random project in Kansas, right? And so that is a thing, right? There's people doing this in their spare time. How many people here have written a package that they're really into, but like 5 years go by and you can't maintain it anymore, and you hope someone else picks it up because it's foundational? And that's become a problem. There's recently a thing on CRAN, some package couldn't be maintained by the author anymore, and CRAN was going to delist it. That meant 100 other packages that everyone uses was getting delisted until someone had to step in and fix it. So that is a hard problem, and I don't have the answer, so I'm gonna just...
No. We need Wes up here to answer that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even Wes doesn't touch pandas anymore.
No, I know.
Right.
Luckily, Wes built a whole, like, I don't want to say foundation, but a whole system behind pandas to do it, because he built a team of, 30 people working on it now, because that was no one-person job. So even Wes can't do it.
I think when you first start using the libraries, they all kind of look the same in that you can't look at them and know how many people are behind it or how important it is. And I think, I saw this back in the days when using open source software was seen as illegitimate inside of companies, right? We can't use open source software. You don't build $1 billion company on shareware, is the sort of thing people would say. And what we've seen is you're in the community for a while, you think very differently about a library that's put out as somebody who's finishing a PhD at a state university by themselves versus a library that's managed by, say, folks at Posit, right? We can look at those and say, one of these, somebody's gonna go, become a junior professor somewhere or go into industry, and they're probably not gonna maintain that. And these others have people and a company who's helping to support it. These are higher probability of continuing longer, although they may end of life as well. And so I think when you first come to these tooling, you gotta look, who is this person that's maintaining it? What's the infrastructure behind it? Now that's no guarantee, but it also helps you kind of make sense of it. So I think that's a piece of it. Now in terms of using Meetup or something else, that's a little bit like Meetup, the website. That's a little bit like the Twitter versus LinkedIn versus something else discussion. It's like, in a bunch of ways, it's just people know how to get there and find it. The reason it'll get abandoned is they either cover it up in ads, make it bad, or make it super expensive, right?
There's a reason we don't do registration on meetup.com anymore.
Yeah, they started charging for it.
They started charging exorbitantly. We've always had to pay to be a member, but then they started taking so ever since Drew one day got burned, we charged like a nominal fee for people to attend. This way, he doesn't spend $1,000 on pizza and have 5 people show up. That happened to you once.
They did, that's why we started charging.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and so we kept that. And the Meetup wanted to take like a large slice of that little $5,
Yeah.
which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're trying to buy $1,000 worth of pizza, that slice adds up. No, that was not meant to be a pun. I'm happy I made it.
Contend your puns, you coward.
So yeah, so we don't do registrations on Meetup for that reason. Also, because there was a while there where the platform was going way downhill, and the leadership would meet with a bunch of us large organizers and just patronize us. It's gotten better since then, but we still have an external platform because maybe we have to do something else for discovery. I don't know what that is, friendfinder.com again, but we'll find something. It's the Meetup's more important than meetup.com.
Yep.
Yeah, lowercase m. All right, little Lander in the front row.
Okay. How much days is the next conference in?
How many days is the next conference in?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So we don't have it booked yet, but let's assume it's in a year. So let's say 366 days from now.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot of days. Yes, but the next Meetup will be sooner.
Wow. That's a lot.
There's another one.
They're on the loose.
Come here.
Those are some cute kids.
Thank you for the very hard question. That's probably the hardest one, but we should ask Nicole when the next one will be.
All right, Kirk has a question here as well. Here, one sec, Kirk, so everyone can hear it. There we go.
All right. I just want to thank all you guys for everything you guys have done over the years. I mean, the work that you've done and my wanting to be like you is why I've had the career that I've had for the last 20 years, and I really appreciate it.
We thought we were trying to be like you.
Yeah.
That's very confusing to me.
It's complete fake, so I can hang out with you guys.
Same.
But one of the things I've always kind of thought about is like, everything we've done to me is kind of a progression, and I've always wondered like what's going to be the disruption? What's going to be the next that's different, right? I mean, we've kind of always worked in data frames and matrices and applied algorithms. Like, what is going to be different in the future that's not what we're doing now?
Well, really quickly, at least in terms, I think that Jared's answer around embeddings is a big part of this. I think that's, I mean, I don't know if that's the kind of answer you were looking for, but moving from structured tabular information like we like to deal with as data scientists, or blocks of natural language, more and more and more, we're going to be relying on large language models to be encoding and decoding information out of that abstraction of an embedding layer. And I think there's a huge amount of potential there. And there are a lot of concerns because we will never know exactly what's going on. But yeah, beyond embeddings, I don't know if anyone else has a better answer to that.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I mean, because I see it in geospatial stuff, I see it in time series stuff, and I think actually in a lot of cases that'll be way more impactful than some of the LMMs, which to me are kind of silly. But yeah, absolutely.
I think baked in a bunch of this is what folks are doing with GPUs. And it's kind of, obviously the large language models are capturing attention, but if you look at like what Voltron's doing with Theseus and the ability to, the problem with Theseus is you can't have a little Theseus. You got to have a lot of Theseus all at once. And if there's some way for me to have a little Theseus, I got a bunch of problems that it could potentially be streamlined that would run a lot faster on a framework like that, only I just don't have enough for something like Theseus. So it's like this in-between Spark and Theseus, there needs to be a little more, there will be more work in there. And I'm not sure if that's the phase change as much as just the continuation of the linear or the natural progression. But outside of the sexy embeddings and stuff like that, I'm still living in big data space and thinking about those problems because I work in simulation data. But it does seem like kind of for the first time in my life, the reason nobody talks about big data is the tooling got so good so fast, it actually got in front of where most people's needs are. So a huge amount of stuff that we were calling big data in 2009 and 10, you can literally do on your MacBook with DuckDB, right? And that's a little surprising to look back in retrospect, but I think we got to fill in that in-between areas.
Excellent. Well, we're out of questions at exactly the point that we're out of time. So
Perfect.
thank you all for playing along perfectly or getting hungry or bored at exactly the right spot. Thank you to all of our panelists for this amazing retrospective and introspective discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.